will always be hobbyist developers, like there are hobbyist painters and hobbyist woodworkers and hobbyist mechanics and all of this sort of stuff. But we're gonna run into a bit of a problem with building up professional developers as we are rolling up the ladder behind us. Who will take over us if we don't train the next generation to replace us? A critique of art, AI, and the legacy of human expertise. This is written by Z, the author of the Anubis project, which you've probably seen protecting various FOSS projects out there, the LKML, a random page on the UNESCO website from AI scrapers. This is someone who has a lot to say about how AI is currently being handled, or better yet, how it's just being allowed to run wild and tear industries apart. So the piece opens with a history of cloth. You know, that thing you make clothes and bedding and various other things out of. I'll leave the full thing linked in the description down below if you'd like to read it for yourself. But the TLDR is, at a time, cloth was incredibly expensive, and making cloth was a very treasured skill that was passed down through the generations. Then comes the powered looms and factories, and suddenly, you don't need to be skilled at making cloth. You can train someone to do so in basically no time whatsoever. And what does this cause? Well, this makes the value plummet into the ground, and the reason why you can buy, a pack of white shirts for like $5. The cloth might be really bad. You might be able to tear it with your hands, but it's really cheap. And the problem with things that are really cheap is when people don't have that much money, they gravitate towards the things that are really cheap. And the cheap cloth ended up winning out over the well-produced artisan cloth that took a lot longer to make and was a lot more expensive. At some point though, someone had enough and decided to do something about it, taking up the name Ned. He led a movement that resulted in riots, destroying factory equipment, and some got so bad they had to call the army in to break them up. Townspeople local to those factory towns were in full support of Ned's followers. Heck, even the soldiers sent in to stop the riots ended up seeing the points behind what Ned's followers were doing and joined in themselves. And as you could probably guess from the shirt example from earlier, or just your general shopping habits, the factories won out in the end. This movement was known as the Luddites, or the followers of Ned Ludd. The word Luddite has since shifted meaning over time and is now understood as someone who is against technological development. The Luddites, though, were not against technology. They were against how it was implemented and the consequences of its rollout. They were skeptical that the shitty cloth that the powered loom produced would be a net benefit to society because it meant that customers would inevitably have to buy their clothes over and over again, turning a one-time purchase into a subscription. And nowadays, countries like the UK treat many forms of weaving as an endangered skill where there are no new apprentices taking up that skill, and the people who have the skill are getting old, and it very well could be lost to time. All that remains of that expertise is now contained in R&D departments of the companies that produce the next generations of power looms and whatever heritage craft practitioners remain. Remember the Apollo program that let us travel to the moon. It was mostly powered by the Rocketdyne F1 engine. We have all the technical specifications to build that rocket again. We know all the parts you need, all the machining you have to do, and roughly understand how it would be done. But we can't build another one because all the finesse that had been built up around manufacturing it no longer exists. Society has moved on and we don't have expertise in the tools that they used to make it happen. What we are losing in the process, we won't know until it's long gone. And it might seem crazy, but the exact same thing can happen in the development world as well. The industry only ever seems to want to hire people with the word senior in their title. I'm sure you've all seen the junior job applications where it's like, oh, you need 5 or 10 years of experience. If you have 10 years of experience, you should be in a senior title by then. You should not be applying for a junior position. They almost never want to create people with the word senior in their title. This is kind of concerning for me. People get old and no longer want to or are able to work. People get sick and become disabled. Accidental deaths happen and remove people from the workforce. This is the state of old languages like COBOL, where basically there's COBOL code out there and somebody needs to maintain it. But there's very few new developers who are learning COBOL as a language, and very few people who are gonna be maintaining that code, and a lot of those people are very close to retirement. Now, the problem is, if you do accept getting the COBOL code out of that language, now you've lost yourself a guaranteed position. The non-conspiratorial angle for why this is happening is that money isn't free anymore, and R&D salaries are no longer taxable business expenses in the US, so software jobs that don't produce significant value are more risky to the company. So of course they'd steal the future to save today. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? However, this has been happening for a long time, and this is nothing new whatsoever. The thing that's speeding up the problem, though, and is very much going to become an issue, is generative AI agents. I am not entirely opposed to AI. I want to be clear about this, but the lack of consideration for how you're going to handle a development studio when you want to replace the majority of the team with AI, and a lot of places are very much considering this. What happens when those senior people end up retiring? Like, how do you replace them? And what do you do with the code that may not be perfect when those senior people aren't looking at the code anymore? This started out innocently enough. It was just better ways to fill in the blanks of your code. I remember early on, it was basically just more powerful autocomplete. So it could generate a skeleton of an object for you, and then you can fill in everything you need. But this has ballooned and developed from better autocomplete to the point where you can just assign issues to GitHub Copilot and have the issue magically solved for you in a pull request. Now, what's more likely to happen is it to magically generate a problem and then solve that problem. Prime example of that is this comment from Daniel Stenberg, the creator of curl. He was giving feedback to GitHub on Copilot, and he got it to just generate a security vulnerability that doesn't exist. It made up a lot of nonsense about it, a 100-line description that didn't exist. And ask the AI model for an essay and you get a passable result in 15 minutes. It's really, really good at writing a lot of text, that I will say. And the keyword there is passable. When there is money involved, okay is basically all you need. Enough not to annoy people. At some level, this is really cool. This reduces toil and drudgery to waiting for half an hour at most. In a better world, I would really enjoy having a tool like this to help deal with the toil work that I need to do, but I don't really have the energy to. We are not in a better world though. We're in a world where these AI tools are being pitched as the next industrial revolution, one where foisting our expertise away into language models is somehow being framed as a good thing for society. I think the big difference between now and the industrial revolution is work was becoming easier. It was easier to manage a farm. It was easier to produce items, and because of that, we were able to produce more. Now, we just didn't exactly follow suit with that, but, whole nother problem. The problem now, though, is we're not trying to increase the amount of work that's being done necessarily. That is an after effect of what's being done. The goal is to reduce costs. The goal is to pay less people to get the same amount of work done. There's just one small problem. Who is going to be paid and reap benefits from this change? Because, well, a lot of the people working the dev positions, the people doing the actual work in the company, they're not going to be at the company any longer. Additionally, if there's such a transformational technology, why are key figures promoting it, talking down to people? Why wouldn't they be using this to lift people up? So when you see articles from companies like Meta, where it's like, we're going to replace 50%, 90% of our development force by X year with AI, the part that's not really considered there is, where do the people who were doing that development work go? Because they can certainly go to another company, but what do they do when every other company is doing the same thing? Because that's what tends to happen. When a major company like Meta or Google or Amazon does some big change, a lot of the smaller startups, a lot of the smaller companies will follow suit doing the exact same thing. Vibe coding is payday loans for technical debt. This is a great way to put it, and I'm gonna have to yoink that for my own use. As a technical educator, I'm gonna have to steal that one as well, and that's how I'm gonna describe myself from now on. One of the things that I want to imprint on people is that programming is a skill you can gain, and you too can both program things and learn how to program things. I want there to be more programmers out there. What I'm about to say is not an attempt to gatekeep the skill and craft of computing. However, the ways the proponents of vibe coding are going about it are simply not the way forward to a sustainable future. I know there are people out there that say things like, oh, I can't program, I'm not smart enough to program. And yes, there are absolutely people who do not have the mental capacity to program. That is 100% the truth. That is a very, very tiny amount of the population, though. And most people, if they're willing to sit down, learn the syntax, learn how to think through problems, absolutely can program. The truth is a lot of people are just lazy and looking for an excuse not to program. About a year ago, Cognition teased an AI product named Devon, a completely automated software engineer. You'd assign Devon tasks in Slack or Jira, it would spin off a virtual machine and plot its way through fixing whatever you asked it to. This demo deeply terrified me, as it was nearly identical to a story I wrote for the Takaro Law, Protoss. This was a satire piece about exactly that. And you know what the best satire is? Satire that eventually ends up becoming a reality. Devon was that implement that feature button the same way Protoss mythically did. From what I've seen with companies that actually use Devon, it's nowhere near actually being useful and usually needs a lot of hand-holding to do anything remotely complicated. Thank God. Thank God for now, because it's only going to get better and better and better. Even if it only gets to the point where it's okay and good enough. A lot of developers are frankly okay and good enough, myself included, and it's gonna be pretty easy to replace people. People are being put on pips for not wanting to install Copilot, a performance improvement plan. You've been a bad boy at your job and you need to do better or we're gonna fire you. Deadlines come faster because the AI can write the code for you, right? This problem's already kind of happened in the freelance space, not with AI, but with those websites being taken up by people who are willing to work for less money, whether they're in a third world country, whether they are young. But there was a time where these freelance sites you could make really good money on, and then it came down and down and down and down to the point where unless you're somewhere where $50 a month is a lot of money, it really isn't viable to do some of that work. Twitter and Reddit contain myriads of stories of idea guys using Cursor or Windscribe to generate their dream app's backend and then making posts like some users claim they can see other people's stuff. What kind of developer do I need to hire for this? Follow-up posts include gems such as, lol, why do coders charge so much? I remember seeing one the other day where it was like a vibe-coded YouTube DL client. It was like a web client and you'd pay for it. And I think he vibe coded the way the account system was being done as well, because people's full name and addresses were just available. By saving money in the short term, by producing shitty software that doesn't last, are we actually spending more money over time rebuying nearly identical software after it evaporates from light use? This is the kind of thing that makes Canada not allow us to self-identify as engineers, and I can't agree with their point more. I think the case is the same in Queensland? Someone correct me there, but I think it's Queensland where you actually need a license to be an engineer. Vibe coding is a distraction. It's a meme. It will come. It will go. Everyone will abandon vibe coding tools eventually. I do agree on this to an extent. I think the idea of vibe coding as like this funny meme thing is just going to go away. But there is a lot of tools where AI is being directly integrated into it, and I think we're going to stop saying vibe coding, and it's just going to become part of the expected workflow for a professional developer. I'm not going to lie though, the UX of vibe coding tools is top-notch. From a design standpoint, it's aiming for that subtle brilliance where it seems to read your mind and then fill in the blanks you didn't even know you needed to fill in. This is a huge part of how you can avoid the terror of the empty canvas. If you know what you're doing, an empty canvas represents infinite possibilities. There's nothing there to limit you from being able to do it. You have total power to shape everything. Honestly, I think the best way to deal with the empty canvas problem is don't start with an empty canvas. Start with a template file. Start with something that already does a little bit. Start with an existing project you have, and then strip things out of that and rearrange it so you're not starting from nothing. In my opinion, this is effectively a tool to help you get past that fear of having no ground to stand on. And if that's what you're doing, if you're using it to generate a template, if you're using it to generate some like basic Hello World program, I don't see an issue with that because you're just using it as a starting point. It's the same thing as just downloading a random GitHub project and using that as a starting point and then building your stuff from there. This helps you get past executive dysfunction and just ship things already. That part is a good thing. I genuinely want people to create more things with technology that are focused on the problems that they have. This is the core of how you learn to do new things. This is also a problem that I see with people starting on YouTube. I've had people come to me and say, how do I start a channel? How do I start doing this? How do I start doing... Literally just make the video and upload it. Stop worrying about if it's perfect. It's not. It's going to be absolute garbage. The first video you make, the first 10 videos, first 50 videos, absolute utter garbage. Make them, move on, learn why they're garbage, and do better. I want more people to be able to do software development. I think there's a travesty that we don't have basic computer literacy classes in every stage of education so that people know how the machines that control their lives work and how to use them to their advantage. I've talked to people a little bit older than me, and they've said things like, oh, we had computing classes, we had typing classes, and that wasn't a thing by the time I was in school. I was lucky enough to have programming classes in high school, but I wish that was something I was introduced to earlier. I always had that mindset of like tearing things apart and working out how they worked, so I was in a much better state than a lot of people, but if you go through your entire education now and you're on an iPad or a Chromebook and you use a phone at home, you never touch a Windows or a Mac or a Linux system, I don't know how you're expected to use a computer when you get into the workforce. Now, as I said earlier, Z is the developer of the Anubis project, and they've had calls with various projects out there dealing with AI scrapers. And then in the news, the AI companies claim, oh no, we're just poor little Victorian era orphans. We can't possibly afford to fairly compensate the people that made the things that make our generative AI models as great as they are. When the US Copyright Office tried to make AI training not a fair use, the head of the office suddenly found themselves jobless. What a coincidence. The actual answer to this, and this is going to sound a bit out there, but stay with me. They believe that we're on the verge of creating artificial superintelligence. To be fair, I'm on that same boat as well, and this is why I'm actually worried about the situation. Something that will be such a benevolent good force, okay, that part I don't believe, that any strife in the short term will ultimately be cancelled out by the good that is created as a result. These people unironically believe that a machine god will arise, and we will be able to delegate all of our human problems to it, and we'll all be fine forever. All under the thumb of the people that brought the GPUs with dollars to run that machine god. Do you know who's gonna make the most money out of this situation? Nvidia, look at their charts. Look at how much of their money is data centers. If you ever wonder why they don't care about the desktop, that's why. Now, to the surprise of many, developers aren't the first to suffer here. Developers, this is a problem that's sort of creeping up. The first to suffer were the artists. And people say things like AI isn't creative, AI art isn't real art, and so on and so forth. But what artists failed to realize is a lot of people don't actually care. A lot of people don't care about the process, don't care about the artist, and even if the work is kinda scuffed, for a lot of people, kinda scuffed is good enough. Remember, people are willing to buy a 10-pack of white shirts that break within 6 months. They're willing to have their character drawn and not have to pay for it, even if it's a little rough. This is an example of Z's FF14 character composited into a Breath of the Wild scene, and if you stare at it, you're gonna notice some things which seem weird, lighting doesn't make sense, lots of stuff's wrong with it. but it was also free. But for an actual artist, it'd probably take at least a week or two as the artist worked through their commission queue and sent you in-progress work before they got to the final result. By my estimates, between the artists I prefer commissioning, this would cost somewhere between 150 USD and 500 euro at Why did you swap currency? Don't do that. Don't do that. That's annoying. Probably more when you account for delays in the artistic process and making sure the artist is properly paid for their time. It'd be a masterpiece that I probably want to get printed and framed, but it would take a non-zero amount of time and a non-zero amount of money. If you only really enjoy the products of work and don't understand or respect any of the craftsmanship that goes into making it happen, you'd probably be okay with that instantly generated result. Sure, the sun isn't right, and the fingers are weird, the tail is the wrong shape, and everything's weird, but you got it very quickly, and you didn't have to pay upwards of 500 euros, and you can pay a lot more for artists out there. If you want to get really, really good work done, that can get very expensive, because a lot of time is spent in making the art. So, a friend of theirs also runs a furry art board, and look, furry art isn't exactly known for artistic prowess, I think we'll say in the nicest way possible. A lot of it is very bad and very scuffed, and even the actual artists don't draw things well. And this friend thought that people would use generative AI tools as part of their workflow to make better works faster. What ended up happening is a flood of barely passable art that people are just okay with because it's good enough. And honestly, this is why I'm convinced within, let's say, 2 or so years, that there is going to be a song at the top of the charts that is AI generated. Listen to the songs that make it to the top nowadays and tell me that an AI can't make that, because oh my god, they're bad. And don't be mistaken to thinking that you can't make high quality art with generative AI, because there's some really good stuff out there that, unless you know exactly what you're looking for, you're going to have no idea. Especially in cases where artists use it as a baseline and then clean up line work and things like that. They basically just do 99% of the work with the AI and then add a bit on top. They filter out the hallucination marks, they take the time to use it as a tool to accelerate their own work instead of replacing it. This is the best possible use. That's just not the way that most people are using it. Most people are using it as a full-on replacement, whether that be in art or, sadly, in development as well. And very importantly, we deserve more in our lives than good enough. Absolutely agreed. What are we going to do when everyone that cares about the craft of software ages out, burns out, or escapes the industry because of the ownership class settling unrealistic expectations on people? Are the burnt out developers just going to stop teaching people the right ways to make software? Is society as a whole going to be right when they look back on the good old days and think that software used to be more reliable? There is a lot more said in this post, and I highly recommend you go and read the full thing for yourself. These blog posts are great. I love the work that Z does. And, yeah, I fully agree that this is going to become a problem and is already becoming a problem. How bad is it going to get? Unless you got a time machine, I don't know. My guess, though, is it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts down below. So, if you liked the video, go like the video. If you really like the video and want to see more doom posting about AI, subscribe to the channel. And also, if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to the Liberapay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and don't worry. Be happy.